Kaya pulled her security jacket tighter as she approached the abandoned Mercy General Hospital. Tonight would be her last shift guarding the 15-story building before demolition crews arrived next week. The city had finally decided to tear down the crumbling structure that had been empty for 3 years since budget cuts forced its closure. At 24, Kaya was still finishing her architecture degree and working part-time security to pay the bills. She'd drawn the short straw for this assignment. Nobody wanted to spend 12 hours alone in a building where hundreds of people had died over its 60-year history. The other guards whispered stories about strange sounds and unexplained incidents, but Kaya needed the overtime pay. The autumn storm was getting worse as she used her keycard to enter through the main lobby. Wind howled around the building's corners, rattling windows and sending leaves spiraling past the darkened glass. Inside, emergency lighting cast an eerie green glow through the corridors, creating long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Kaya made her way to the security office on the second floor, her footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. The building still smelled faintly of disinfectant, and something else, something organic and unpleasant that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. Old hospitals never fully lost their institutional odour, even years after the last patient had been wheeled out. The security office was cramped but functional, with a bank of monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the building. Most of the upper floors had been stripped of valuable equipment, leaving behind only the bones of what had once been a bustling medical centre. Operating rooms, patient wards, the ICU, all empty now except for the occasional piece of forgotten furniture or medical equipment too old to salvage. Kaya settled into the worn desk chair and began her rounds checklist. Every 2 hours she was required to walk through each floor, checking for signs of break-ins, vandalism or structural damage. It was tedious work, but she'd done it enough times to develop a routine. Start at the top, work her way down, document anything unusual, and try not to let the building's oppressive atmosphere get to her. As she reviewed the camera feeds, everything appeared normal. Empty corridors, vacant rooms, the occasional flutter of plastic sheeting covering broken windows. But as the storm intensified outside, Kaya began to notice something odd about the monitors. The interference started subtly, just brief static flickers across monitor 7, which covered the 8th floor pediatric ward. Kaya tapped the screen, thinking it was a loose cable, but the static cleared on its own. She made a note to check the camera during her next rounds, then continued reviewing the other feeds. Monitor 12 showed the 15th floor, where the psychiatric ward had been located before the hospital's closure. As Kaya watched, something moved past the camera's field of view. Just a shadow, really, but it seemed too purposeful to be debris blown by the storm. She leaned closer to the screen, adjusting the brightness, but saw nothing else unusual. At 10:30 p.m., 30 minutes into her shift, Kaya began her first patrol. She took the service elevator to the 15th floor, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as she stepped into what had once been the psychiatric unit. The smell was stronger here, that organic, decay-like odour that seemed to intensify in certain areas of the building. The ward was laid out in a long corridor with patient rooms branching off to either side. Many of the doors stood open, revealing empty spaces that still contained old bed frames and restraint equipment that hadn't been worth removing. As Kaya walked the hallway, her footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. She was checking the last room when she heard it, a soft, humming sound, like someone quietly singing a lullaby. The melody was hauntingly familiar, though she couldn't place where she'd heard it before. Kaya froze, listening intently, but the humming stopped as soon as she focused on it. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing down the empty corridor. "Security, if someone's in here, you need to identify yourself." No response. Kaya continued her patrol, but the humming started again, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. Sometimes it sounded like a child's voice, other times like an elderly woman's. The melody never changed, but the voices seemed to multiply, creating an eerie chorus that followed her through the abandoned ward. By the time she reached the stairwell, Kaya's hands were shaking. She radioed down to the security office, but got only static in response. The building's radio system had always been unreliable, especially during storms, but tonight it seemed completely dead. As she descended to the 14th floor, Kaya heard footsteps above her, slow, deliberate steps that seemed to match her pace exactly. When she stopped, they stopped. When she resumed walking, they started again. But every time she looked back up the stairwell, she saw nothing but darkness. The 14th floor had housed the hospital's surgical suites, and the operating room still contained some of the older equipment that had been too outdated to relocate. Kaya's flashlight illuminated rusty surgical tables, broken monitors, and IV poles that cast twisted shadows on the walls. In operating room 3, she found something that made her blood run cold. The surgical table in operating room 3 was far too clean. Not dusty or abandoned like the rest of the hospital, but polished, almost prepared, as if something had just taken place. A dark stain marked its center, deep and recent, though Kaya couldn't bring herself to decide what it was. Her flashlight trembled as she scanned the room. Surgical instruments surrounded the table, arranged in precise clinical patterns. Above, the overhead light beamed down with harsh, sterile brightness. That alone should have been impossible. The facility had been without power for months, relying on backup lanterns and flashlights. Yet this light shone steadily, with an energy that shouldn't exist. Kaya stepped back toward the door, her pulse thudding louder in her ears. Then she saw the monitors. 3 patient screens stood active, displaying vitals, heart rates, blood oxygen, pressure, all of them fluctuating as if connected to invisible patients. The green lines moved smoothly, accompanied by soft beeps that fell into perfect rhythm with her own breathing. No wires, no bodies, and yet the machines were undeniably alive. Kaya turned and left the room quickly, but the hum followed her into the corridor. It deepened, spreading through the walls like something organic. She heard tones buried in the sound, voices, about medicine and healing, but beneath it lay a wrongness, a distortion, as if the words had been twisted by time or grief. The voices seemed to echo from the very bones of the building. She reached for her radio, hoping for static, something normal. Instead, her own voice crackled through, repeating a security check she'd made 20 minutes earlier. But she hadn't transmitted anything. The system had been dead for days. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned toward the stairwell, but the door refused to move. The handle turned, but the frame wouldn't give, as though the entire structure had decided to hold her in place. She tried the elevator. Nothing. The button didn't light up, and the digital display above the doors flashed broken text that made no sense. The hum intensified, joined now by other sounds, wheels squeaking on old linoleum, the quiet hiss of pressurized tanks, the soft tap of rubber soles moving down empty halls. It was like the hospital was remembering itself, not returning to life exactly, but replaying something, endlessly. Kaya walked deeper into the 14th floor. She didn't want to, but something, a pull just beyond conscious thought, guided her steps. Her mind shouted to turn back, but her feet didn't listen. More rooms passed on either side, each more unsettling than the last. At the end of the corridor stood a small figure in a hospital gown, her back turned to Kaya. The child couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with long, dark hair that fell past her shoulders. She was the source of the humming, that haunting lullaby that had been following Kaya through the building. As Kaya approached, her footsteps echoing in the silence, the humming stopped. "Hey, sweetheart," Kaya called out, trying to keep her voice calm despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Are you okay? You shouldn't be here." The child turned around slowly, and Kaya's breath caught in her throat. The little girl's face was pale as porcelain, her eyes completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire visible portion of her eyes. Her hospital gown was stained with something dark that looked disturbingly like blood. "You're not supposed to be here either," the child said in a voice that sounded far too old for her apparent age. "This is our home now, has been for a long time." Kaya took a step backward, but found herself unable to look away from those terrible black eyes. "What's your name, honey? Are you lost?" "I'm Melody," the girl replied, tilting her head at an unnatural angle. "I died here 3 years ago. Brain cancer. Room 1247. They tried so hard to save me, but the treatments just made everything worse." The corridor around them began to change. The walls, which had been stripped bare and covered in dust, suddenly displayed charred-like drawings, taped to every surface. Crayon pictures of families, houses, flowers, but all rendered in disturbing blacks and reds. The ceiling tiles shifted and rearranged themselves, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. "There are lots of us here," Melody continued, her black eyes never blinking. "Patients who died alone, scared, in pain. We can't leave. This building holds us, keeps us trapped in the moments of our deaths, playing them over and over again." More figures began to appear in the corridor, shadowy forms of patients, in various stages of decay. Some were children like Melody. Others were elderly patients still attached to IV poles and oxygen tanks that trailed behind them like ghostly umbilical cords. They moved slowly toward Kaya, their faces expressing a desperate hunger she couldn't comprehend. "But you're alive," Melody said, her voice echoing strangely in the transforming hallway. "You have something we need, something we can use to finally break free from this place." Kaya stumbled backward, finally breaking eye contact with the dead child. She turned and ran toward the stairwell, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of her. The distance to the door never decreased, no matter how fast she ran. Behind her, she could hear the shuffle of feet and the rattle of medical equipment as the ghostly patients pursued her. The humming started again, but now it was coming from dozens of voices, a choir of the dead singing their mournful lullaby. The sound filled the hallway, reverberating off the walls and growing louder with each step Kaya took. Just when she thought she would never reach the stairwell, her hand finally closed around the door handle. The stairwell door slammed shut behind Kaya with a sound like thunder, cutting off the chorus of dead voices. She leaned against the metal door, for breath, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The stairwell was darker than the corridor, lit only by a single emergency light that flickered intermittently, casting dancing shadows on the concrete walls. Kaya fumbled for her radio, desperate to call for help, but the device was completely dead. Not even static emerged from the speaker. She tried her cell phone, but the screen showed no signal bars and the battery indicator was flashing red despite being fully charged when her shift began. She had to get out of the building. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape whatever supernatural forces had taken hold of Mercy General. But as she started down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, she realized something was terribly wrong. She had been on the 14th floor, which meant she should reach the ground level after descending 13 flights. But after counting 23 flights, she was still descending. And the stairwell showed no signs of ending. The emergency light above began to strobe faster, creating a disorienting effect that made her feel dizzy and nauseous. Each flash revealed something different, sometimes the normal concrete stairs, sometimes wooden steps that looked centuries old, sometimes what appeared to be stone stairs descending into an underground chamber that shouldn't exist. Kaya stopped running and pressed herself against the wall, trying to regain her bearings. That's when she heard it. Footsteps echoing from above, but not normal footsteps. These were the metallic clicks of medical equipment wheels rolling across linoleum, mixed with the shuffle of slippered feet and the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors. They were following her. She looked up the stairwell and saw lights descending toward her. The soft glow of medical equipment displays, IV pumps and patient monitors. The ghostly patients from the 14th floor were pursuing her, and they were moving much faster than their shuffling gait had suggested. Kaya resumed her desperate flight downward, but the stairs seemed to multiply beneath her feet. For every step she took, 2 more appeared below. The stairwell was becoming longer, deeper, as if the building was stretching itself to prevent her escape. Behind her, the sounds grew louder. She could hear Melody's voice rising above the others, still humming that haunting lullaby, but now with words that chilled her blood. Come back to us, come back to play. In our hospital, we'll always stay. The emergency light began to flicker more rapidly, and in the strobing illumination, Kaya caught glimpses of the pursuing spirits. They moved like a procession of the damned, their hospital gowns flowing behind them, medical tubes and wires trailing like spectral chains. Some crawled down the walls like insects, others simply materialized on lower steps, cutting off potential escape routes. Just when Kaya thought she would be trapped forever in this impossible stairwell, she saw something that filled her with hope. A green exit sign glowing steadily below her, marking what appeared to be a real door leading to the outside world. Kaya sprinted toward the exit sign, her legs burning from the endless descent. But as she reached for the door handle, her hand passed through it, as if it were made of light rather than solid metal. The exit sign was just another illusion, another trap set by the supernatural forces that had claimed the hospital. Behind her, the ghostly procession was getting closer. She could feel the temperature drop as they approached, and her breath began to form visible clouds in the suddenly frigid air. The metallic sounds of medical equipment grew deafeningly loud, echoing off the stairwell walls with increasing intensity. Desperate, Kaya pressed herself against the wall and closed her eyes, trying to think of another way out. That's when she remembered the service tunnels. During her orientation, the head security guard had mentioned an old maintenance tunnel system that connected the hospital to the adjacent medical office building. If she could find access to those tunnels, she might be able to escape underground. Opening her eyes, Kaya noticed something she had missed before. A small maintenance door, barely visible in the wall about 2 flights down. It was painted the same color as the concrete, camouflaged to blend in with the surroundings. She could hear the ghostly patients getting closer, their ethereal voices joining melodies in a chorus of the damned. She made a desperate leap, jumping over the railing and landing hard on the concrete below. Pain shot through her ankle, but she ignored it and limped toward the maintenance door. Behind her, she heard an as the spirits realized their prey was escaping. The maintenance door was locked, but years of decay had weakened the frame. Kaya threw her shoulder against it, and on the 3rd impact, it burst open. She tumbled into a narrow concrete tunnel that smelled of mold and stagnant water. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically along the walls, providing just enough illumination to see that the tunnel stretched in both directions. She chose left, moving as quickly as her injured ankle would allow. The tunnel was claustrophobic, barely wide enough for her shoulders, and the ceiling was so low she had to hunch over as she moved. Water from overhead pipes, creating an unsteady rhythm that masked the sound of her footsteps. Behind her, she could hear the spirits trying to follow, but their ghostly forms seemed unable to fully materialize in the confined space. Their voices became muffled and distant, though melodies still echoed faintly through the tunnel walls. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Kaya saw another door ahead of her. This one was different, newer, with a digital keypad lock that glowed red in the darkness. As she approached, the display suddenly changed from red to green, and she heard the electronic lock. The door opened to reveal not freedom, but something far worse. The door opened into a vast underground chamber that shouldn't have existed beneath the hospital. The space was enormous, stretching far beyond what the building's footprint could accommodate. Ancient stone walls rose into darkness above, and the air carried a scent of decay that was far older than the hospital itself. What terrified Kaya most was that the chamber wasn't empty. Dozens of hospital beds were arranged in neat rows, each one occupied by a patient. But these weren't the ghostly spectres she had encountered upstairs. These patients appeared solid, real, their chests rising and falling with slow, laboured breathing. They were all connected to medical equipment that hummed and beep 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 beeped in the darkness, creating a mechanical symphony of life support. IV bags hung from rusted poles, dripping unknown fluids into the arms of patients who appeared to be in deep comas. Heart monitors displayed steady rhythms, oxygen tanks hissed softly, and ventilators breathed for those who could no longer breathe for themselves. The scene looked like a twisted parody of a modern ICU, but the equipment was decades old, some pieces bearing manufacturer dates from the 1970s and 1980s. As Kaya stepped further into the chamber, emergency lighting flickered on, illuminating the full scope of the horror. The patients weren't just sleeping, they were being kept alive by the machines, but their bodies showed signs of advanced decay. Skin had turned grey and waxy, hair had fallen out in patches, and some appeared to have been here for years, possibly decades. At the far end of the chamber she saw a familiar figure, Melody, but not the ghostly child from upstairs. This was Melody as she had been in life, lying in a hospital bed with her dark hair spread across a yellowed pillow. Machines surrounded her bed, keeping her small body alive despite the obvious ravages of the brain cancer that had killed her. "You found us," came a voice from behind her. Kaya spun around to see a figure in a doctor's coat, but his face was hidden in shadow. "This is where we keep them, the ones who died alone, in pain, forgotten by the world above. We give them a chance to live again, even if it's not quite the same kind of life." Kaya backed away, but found her path blocked by more figures in medical attire, nurses, doctors, technicians, all with their faces obscured by shadow or surgical masks. They moved with the same ethereal quality as the patients upstairs, but down here they seemed more solid, more purposeful. "The hospital may be closing," the doctor continued, "but our work continues. We've been collecting the dying, the forgotten, the ones who slip through the cracks. Down here, they never have to experience death again. They exist in an eternal twilight between life and death." The machines around them began to beep more rapidly, as if responding to Kai's presence. The patients on the bed started to stir, their eyes opening to reveal the same black voids she had seen in Melody's ghostly form upstairs. "And now we have you," the doctor said, stepping closer. "A healthy, living person to add to our collection. You'll help us understand how to perfect the process, how to bridge the gap between life and death more completely." Kaya realized with growing horror that she hadn't stumbled into an escape route. She had walked directly into the source of the hospital's supernatural activity. Kaya's survival instincts kicked in with desperate force. As the shadowy medical staff moved to surround her, she grabbed the nearest piece of equipment, an old oxygen tank, and swung it with all her strength. The metal connected with the closest figure, and to her surprise, it passed right through him like he was made of mist. But the action had an unexpected effect. The moment the tank passed through the ghostly doctor, every machine in the chamber began to malfunction simultaneously. Alarms blared, monitors flatlined, and the steady beeping that had maintained the artificial lives of the patients became a chaotic symphony, of failure. The patients on the beds began to convulse as their life support systems failed. One by one, the decades-old machines finally gave up their ghostly maintenance of the suspended souls. The chamber filled with an otherworldly wailing as the spirits realized their artificial existence was ending.
What have you done?
The doctor shrieked, his shadowy form beginning to flicker and fade.
We were so close to perfecting the process.
Kaya didn't wait to see what would happen next. She ran toward the back of the chamber, where she could see another tunnel entrance. Behind her, the underground facility was collapsing into supernatural chaos. The lights strobed wildly, casting everything into a nightmarish strobe effect that made it difficult to navigate. As she reached the tunnel, she felt a cold hand grab her ankle. Looking down, she saw Melody, not the ghostly child or the artificially sustained patient, but something in between. The little girl's black eyes were filled with gratitude rather than malice.
"Thank you,"
Melody whispered.
"You set us free. We can finally rest now."
The cold grip released, and Kaya looked back to see the spirits of the patients rising from their beds, no longer bound to the machines that had kept them trapped between worlds. They moved toward a brilliant light that had appeared at the far end of the chamber, finally able to pass on to whatever came after death. Kaya crawled through the second tunnel, which was shorter and led to a basement storage room in the adjacent medical building. She burst through an unlocked door and found herself in a normal, mundane space filled with office supplies and cleaning equipment. Her cell phone immediately picked up a signal. She called 911, reporting a gas leak at the hospital and requesting immediate evacuation of the area. She didn't try to explain what she had really experienced. Who would believe her? The next morning, news reports confirmed that Mercy General Hospital had suffered a catastrophic structural failure during the storm. The building had partially collapsed, making it too dangerous for the planned demolition. The city decided to demolish it immediately, rather than risk further structural damage. Kaya never worked security again. She finished her architecture degree and now specializes in designing buildings that feel warm and welcoming, the opposite of the cold, institutional structures that could harbor such darkness. But sometimes, on stormy nights, she still hears Melody's lullaby in the wind, and she knows that some places hold onto their memories long after the living have moved on. The demolished site of Mercy General Hospital now sits empty, marked only by a small memorial garden for those who died there. Local urban legends claim that on certain nights, you can still see lights in the windows of a hospital that no longer exists. Kaya has never been back to confirm whether those stories are true.